Jess, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I am so excited to chat with you today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation too. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I know we have a couple of colleagues and friends in common in the therapy parenting world. And I know you and I align so much on how we think and conceptualize parenting and how we conceptualize child therapy. I feel like it's our therapeutic niche is just so tight. It's rare that I actually meet another child therapist and
Yeah.
more or less a child therapist that kind of thinks in that play-based, nurturing type way. And so as soon as I came across your profile and, was introduced to you by a few colleagues and friends, like I said, I just was like, oh, this is like my new best friend. I have to talk to her because we're going to have so much to talk about.
Oh my goodness. I feel the same. I feel like it's hard to find, there's a lot of people who do maybe parenting support, but who actually also seek children and work with them and have this approach. It's rare to find. So I'm really excited to chat with you too. I'm sure we could just nerd out for an hour.
I know. Totally. Totally. Even the other day, I saw one of your Instagram posts and I was like, oh my gosh, I literally had put something similar in my book. So, just talking about, play-based approaches to parenting. And of course, my book's coming out soon in May. And I know you're going to be working on a book too. So I'm sure there's some overlap there. But, just talking about those types of approaches. And I feel like play sometimes gets undervalued in our world. And people are like, what, you parent through play? Like, what does that even mean? And I think a lot of times there's this misconception that you have to like sit on the floor and have active dialogue with your child for 30 minutes and the timer's on and you're thinking about dinner and laundry. And they're like, how am I supposed to fit that in? More or less how to modify behaviors, which I talk about in my book. But you posted something the other night and I was just, my heart just was so happy when I read it. And you posted about how you were trying to avoid power struggles, with your children at home and how you can do that. And it was a carousel post. And, one of the ones you talked about was, having your child become a robot and, pressing a button on their back and then they become a robot, or, instead of power struggling with your child, I think it was around mealtime and, picking up a banana and calling them. And I was nerding out. I was like, yes, Jess, like this is exactly what I preach about every single day. But that being said, do you feel that same way? Do you feel like there's pushback sometimes from parents that you have to really like help them understand that perspective? Or how do you feel like parents are approaching that kind of play-based approach to parenting when you post something like that? Do you feel like it's very well received or do you feel like you have to explain it more? Or how do you feel about, just posting things like that?
Yeah, I would say posting and then also with the parents I work with in my practice. Often I think it gets confused like being playful and playing. And I'm sure you find this too, where parents are like, well, I'm not the kind of parent who like plays, sits and plays Barbies or sits and, plays cars or whatever it is. And I have to kind of describe the distinction between being playful as an approach, as a way that you deal with your children in those tough moments, and actually like sitting down and playing, which is also valuable but different. So I think that that's like where I usually start. And then the other thing, parents will be like, well, I don't have the time or energy to, be playful about everything. And so I like to talk about that too, as like, okay, but sometimes if we can be playful, so if we can just turn our child into a robot for just a moment, we can diffuse this entire power struggle that if we don't do it and we meet their counter will with our counter will, or however you want to describe that, all of a sudden now we're in this power struggle, which is a lot more exhausting and takes a lot more energy. So the investment of being playful in the moment just makes things so much easier. So I would say like that's kind of the most pushback. And then the third, and I'm curious what you hear, is I don't have those ideas. My brain doesn't work that way, which totally makes sense. That was my husband too. He's like, okay, Jess, like I can't just think of making up a robot on the spot. So that's why I like to list the ideas just so that parents can have them in their back pocket.
Yeah. And my husband's the same way. He works with adults. I work with kids. And I think the way we conceptualize somehow it just becomes, it's natural to me. And I forget sometimes that it isn't natural for other parents. You know what I mean? And especially as they get older. I mean, maybe in the toddler years or the preschool years, I feel like it's a lot easier because they buy into it more. I think the older kids get, and that's what we're going to kind of focus on today in the podcast is, that middle elementary age group. And I get asked a lot too about, what about like my tweens and my teens? What do I do with them? Like like I still want to connect to them, and they have trouble connecting to their kids in those, kind of older years, because they think that play won't work. And I try to convince them it will, but it's
Mhm.
different. It looks different in those years than it does in the younger years. But yeah, my husband, sometimes thinks it's silly, when I try to do something like that. And he's like, what are you doing? That's not going to work. And then he sees it work and he's like, whoa, like this actually does. And again, that's what I always talk about, is that it's more of a style of parenting. And like you said, in those moments, and it doesn't come naturally, but I think it could, if the more you practice and the more, like you said, that you and I both give those ideas and we plant that seed of, okay, well, that's pretty simple. You just grab a banana for a telephone. Okay, I could have thought of that, but it does, I think it does take some practice. But what do you find as far as, some of those older child years? I feel like, I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. And because I'm a play therapist, I think they're, anomalies of that. Like they buy into it more. But I know some of their friends would probably roll their eyes if their parent tried something like that. So my first question to you is it ever too late to be playful in a relationship with your child to build connection, even if they are a little bit on the older side?
Yeah. And, of course, I'm biased as well, but I would say, no, I don't think it's too late to be playful. But I do think at first it might be a little bit shocking to your child. It might be like, wait, what? Like, this isn't the normal script like, this isn't the pattern that we're used to. Right. But I have seen this even in my daughter's friends who might come over to our house for a play date, and we're very playful. I'm very naturally playful with the kids. I think it's also my career, just like you, right? So you're just used to being playful kind of all day, and it just comes out at home. Um, and even though they might not have the same approach at home, like you can see, even the friends are like, what's going on over there? Like, now I'm interested. Now I want to be part of it. So I don't think it's too late to start. I think one thing I would be mindful of is embarrassment. I think that's a big topic that's coming up in my home. My daughter is also 9, and this is a new kind of emotion feeling that comes out for her, right? So it's like, okay, mom, maybe she loves all the playful stuff, but maybe not, at school, and I wouldn't do that anyway, but she likes to clarify, like, this is okay at home, but please don't act this way in front of my friends at school. It's like, yes, of course. So that's the one thing I would just be mindful of, as your kids get older. I can give an example from last night, a playful strategy I used. And
Yeah, I love that.
this might be better for a bit of younger kids, but my 9-year-old actually loved it. I have 3 kids, 9, 6, and 4, and they're all girls. And last night they were all fighting about something. Who knows? Like, I still don't know. It was not. It was nothing
Right.
really, nothing really important, life changing. So I came into the room and they were all talking over each other, all fighting, and I just pretended to find this remote control, and I was just like, pause. And they all looked at me, and they kept talking, like, pause.
I
And all of a
love
sudden
it.
they all freeze. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to play one of you at a time, and let's hear all of your stories. And so then I just, start playing them. They start saying their stories, and they start arguing. I start pausing. And within a couple of minutes, we were all just laughing so hard. And when I would hit play, they would start just making funny faces. I would have to pause them on. And the problem, which was never really a problem to begin with, was just completely forgotten about, and we moved on. And then my daughter, my 9-year-old, last night had this girls group she goes to. So I was driving her there after this all happened. And she goes, Mommy, I feel like that was such a good idea. Like, I don't even remember what we were even fighting about. Like, did you ever teach parents that one? And I was like, and she knows what I do for work. I'm like, yeah, I've taught that one. Like, I don't know why you've never done that before. That was so good.
I love it. Our kids
Um,
are our biggest fans, right? I
they
just
are.
love it. That positive feedback and affirmation we get from them just feels
Yeah.
so good. That's my dog. She's like, did you put that in your book? Did you put that in your,
Yeah.
or do you teach that? Like, it's the same thing. It's so fun, but
Yeah.
that's
So
great. That's great that
I
she bought
thought,
into it too.
yeah. So that's one strategy that I've used that even for the older kids, they still kind of like it.
Exactly. And I was just talking about this the other day with someone about, and I'd love to hear your feedback on it, about just how to connect with your children. I think just sometimes based on a lot of different ages, honestly. I mean, it kind of goes through the spectrum of ages, but of how to connect with them. And it doesn't even have to be play based, but just how do I get close to them, especially as they get older, and they, become more involved in sports and other activities where peers become a huge influence in their life. And, they maybe want to spend time more with their peers and they're not with their parent as much. And parents feel that disconnect as their child gets older and more involved with things, which is what we want to have, to a certain extent. We want them to be autonomous. We want them to have agency over their own life. But how can parents still stay connected to them at a developmentally positive level? So as you're saying, when you were talking about embarrassment of, we maybe can't hug them and coddle them like we did when they were little as much as we do in their, 9+ years. It would look silly maybe at that age to do certain things, right? But how do you recommend parents stay connected to their kids? And again, it doesn't have to be play-based necessarily, but therapeutically, how can we stay connected to our kids as they get older? How do we keep that connection strong?
That's such a good question. And I think something that we really should be talking about more, because I do think that there is, and curious to your thoughts too, a bit of a pressure for parents like, hey, my child's 9 or 10. Now they should be in all these extracurriculars. They should be doing all of these things. They should be hanging out with their friends more. And we kind of almost discount our role as parents in this age, and we kind of start just doing the things that we think we should do. And not that any of those things are bad, extracurriculars, play dates, all of those things are good, but they can't replace the important connection time that we have with our children. And that needs to still be something that is a priority for parents and is okay if it's a priority. So for me, with a daughter who's that age and who's also extremely extroverted and literally would do every activity under the sun if we let her, it's being very conscious about what we say yes to, what we say no to, and making sure that we still have that time together. And even if that time together is driving her somewhere, like I said, last night I was driving her to this group that she goes to. And on the drive, we have really intentional conversations like, tell me about your day. What's one thing I don't know about you that has happened recently? What's something tricky that's happened? So it's being very intentional about nurturing that relationship as they get older and not just thinking, oh, okay, like it's normal for them to just want to hang out with their friends all the time and not continuing to have that intentional presence.
Yeah. And research does show that parents are still the number one influence on their child, even
Mhm.
through the teen years. And I think a lot of times, whether it's media consumption and what we've been taught by, our current culture of what a parent should or shouldn't be, that, like you said, they discount their own influence because they think, oh, well, once they hit the teen years, forget about it. Like their peers are going to control their lives. And that's not necessarily true. And I think to a certain extent, they don't need us in the same way they do as when they're toddlers, let's say, but they still need us mentally, emotionally, and not just to drive us places, like drive them places. I think, that's kind of what parents always tell me in that role of, well, I just drive them everywhere and they need me for that. They need me for rides, but that's about it. And it's like, no, 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 wait a minute, and then they, talk about how they have this disconnect, this emotional disconnect that their child doesn't open up to them as much and tell them as much. And the number one question I usually get from older child or parents that have older children is, well, how do I get in touch with them? Like, what do I need to do? And I think a lot of the literature out there, a lot of suggestions are, well, maybe get into the same music they're into, find their interests and then, try to make an effort to, grow in their interests. And I just feel like that's kind of saturated when it comes to the advice that's out there. Would you add to it? I love daily check-ins, by the way. I know you asked my thoughts on it too, but I love just doing a quick daily check-in with them. Not a long lecture, short and sweet. How's your day going? And, they can even scale it on a scale of 1 to 10 if they'd like, and if it's a lower number, we can talk about it more or meet them where they're at and how they need your support, I think is important too. And then obviously if it's high, then they'll probably want to talk about it more. And, but do you have any extra thoughts on that of just, if a parent feels stuck and they feel like they're in that stagnant relationship with their child, what would be the first thing they could do to feel more connected to them?
Mhm. I do like the advice of, joining your child's hobby. I've definitely given that advice to parents as well. But I think it's more than that. Like, so it's more than just doing shared activities together. I think that's a great first step. I think it is about being intentional and even, trying to understand and get back into that mindset, remembering what it was like to be that age. So I think about myself maybe as like a 13-year-old girl, what were the kind of struggles that I had? What were the things that were tough? Well, it's probably friendship struggles, starting puberty for the first time, trying to make sense of your body and the changes and all of those things that happen. And so something that might connect me to my child is not necessarily even knowing specifically what's going on for them or what the struggle is or why they're so disconnected, but telling them a story of a time when I was 13 and had a struggle with a friend, and here's how I resolved it. And so there's, I think, a beautiful shift that can happen in that age where parents can start to relate to their children and show children their humanness and the struggles that they faced and what they've been through. And there is a lot of research, I'm sure you know too, on like coaching your kids through friendship struggles and the importance of that, and not just saying like, oh, just ditch them or they're a terrible person, right? Like kids do best when they can have all of these hard things happen in life, friend struggles, puberty's happening, all these hard things, but they have that safe base at home. And so I think really understanding the importance of that is huge for parents.
Yeah, and I think just leaving the door open, like, just letting
Yeah.
them know, "I'm here for you." I know you may not wanna talk about this, like, maybe something happened at school and they're
Mhm.
tight-lipped about it and they don't wanna talk about it, or, they're not ready to talk about it, but just letting them know the door's open, I'm here for you, and maybe just checking in, like, maybe later that night or the next day of, "Hey, if you're ready to talk about it, I'm still here, like, I'm ready to listen." My son is very introverted, very opposite than my daughter. My older daughter, she's, again, probably like yours, very extroverted, just is involved with anything and everything that she can get her hands on, and tells me, even this morning, she was telling me something. She goes, I know this is probably TMI, mom, but I mean, she tells me every single last detail about her
Yes.
day. And it's great. I'm very grateful for it. I'd rather her tell me everything than not tell me anything at all. But my son, on the other hand, he's my 9-year-old, and he just holds it all in very internally. He's getting better, but it's hard for him to express his thoughts, to externalize them, and so forth. And even last night, he woke up crying and he said he had a horrible dream, a very sad dream. And my husband and I both separately, not bombarding him, but kind of trying to ask him, like, well, what is it about? Like, we're here for you and let's talk about it. And you can't just hold it in all day, because he just was, he was, like slumped over while he was walking, like it was going to ruin his entire day. And so we're trying to get him to open up more and let him know he's in a safe place. Like, we're going to listen to him, and it was hard. And even for me, coming from a couple who's both therapy experts, if you will, and we still have this child that is very tight-lipped and doesn't express himself and doesn't open up and doesn't tell us everything. Not that he needs to tell us everything, but
Mhm.
we like to at least know what's going on. When he's sitting, coming down the stairs at breakfast crying because of a horrible dream he had. How would you suggest parents to help their children open up if they aren't communicators like that, if they don't like to share those types of things like the story I just mentioned? What are some ways that can help children open up, or help parents help communicate better with their children in ways like that, if they're not
Yeah.
really sharing that much to begin with?
Absolutely. And I feel like that's a lot of the kids I end up working with are those kids, often boys, not always, but who just really struggle with the vulnerability and just even sharing, yeah, the tough things that are happening. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And for some kids, it's really about uh, it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to share those thoughts. It's hard to see pity in someone else's eyes. Like, I think, especially kids who are really sensitive, it can be really overwhelming. So sometimes I like to have a notebook that parents can have, and maybe it's beside their bed. And so something that a parent might say is, hey, I have this notebook, it's beside my bed. If there's anything that's ever going on for you, it just like feels too hard to tell me face to face, but you want me to know it, just write it in there. I'll check it every night. And that it just gives that barrier so that it doesn't feel quite so vulnerable. But often, I mean, even with your son, he clearly wants you to know, like he's telling you he had a bad dream, but it's just in that moment, it's too much. So sometimes having that separation, another time that can be really helpful is like a car ride or something where you don't have to be looking eye to eye, is a little bit less vulnerable. There's that separation. They can be kind of listening to music or looking at the window as they're talking to you. So finding those moments that maybe don't feel quite so like, we're staring into each other's eyes, which your daughter would probably like, and my daughter would like, but that have that bit of space or distance, I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened. He wouldn't open up and he said, well, do you want to talk to mom about it? Do you want to talk to me about it? And he said, mom. So he, was clearly stated that, which was great. And then on the way to school, I said, and we weren't, I was driving, he was in the back seat. And I said, well, I really would love to hear about it when you're ready. And if you're ready to tell me. And then he did, he told me. And, but I do think that helps because the pressure's off, right? I know a lot of kids do that right before bed too, when the lights are off and they know the end is near, they know you don't have to, like I said, sit eye to eye and talk about it for a long time. They know it's going to be quicker because it's bedtime and they know you want them to go to bed, sooner than later. And the lights are off. They don't have to make that eye contact. So I know a lot of times my kids, and I know there's more things coming out, at least that I've seen on social media, especially in just, different research articles about how one of the best times to talk to your kids is at night. So I'm a huge proponent about talking about big things sometimes in the car, or even right before bed. I know we want to get to bed. We want
Mhm.
them to get to bed. But I feel like because like you had just said, there's not the pressure to talk face to face and or for a long time. I think that's when a good time is to say, is there anything else you want to share with about your day and give them kind of like that one last step. But I love the journal idea. I love that. I feel like every parent should have a little journal by their parents' bed, and no matter what their age is. And if they're little, they can draw it. If they're too little to write, or they don't know how to write very well or can't spell yet, or, but I think that goes back to our expertise, working with young kids that don't have the language skills to share things. And that's why play works so well, or just these types of interventions work so well, is because they don't always have to talk. They sometimes don't want to talk. And that's where these types of interventions come in. So I love
Mhm.
that advice. So talking about that, when it comes to meeting our children where they're at, I feel like let's talk about behavior for a minute. We talked a lot about emotionality, and I've worked a lot with behavior, especially like in a positive behavior support program, PBIS programs that I know are implemented here in the States in, a lot of schools. And, talking about behavior expectations. So let's shift to talk about that for a minute, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on discipline and consequences, incentives, all of those things when it comes to modifying behavior. And especially with, let's take this example. When a child's sitting at a table, let's say for mealtime, and they're sitting still and they're eating, parents, in my experience, that's a behavior expectations that's just expected. Like, well, they're supposed to sit there. They know they're supposed to sit there at the table and quote unquote be good,
Mhm.
but if a child gets up during mealtime and they're running around and, I feel like a lot of times parents are quick to discipline them or, yell at them, get mad at them, sit down. Like that's what you're supposed to be, sitting down. And for some kids that are maybe have hyperactive personalities, it might be really hard for them. Right. So I know I'm kind of leading up to a lot for this question, but
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on behavior expectations in the sense of, think a lot of times parents think they know how their child should behave, and if they don't, they get a punitive consequence, but then they're not really necessarily caught for being good and praised for when they are doing something right. So just kind of wanted to get, just in a general sense, your thoughts on that, and then we can kind of continue on more specific questions.
Yeah, so my general approach is that kids want to do well, and so if they can't, then there's a reason. And I do believe that for the most part children want to meet our expectations and they want to be able to be in that good relationship with us. And so if they can't, like they're always getting up at the table, they're always getting in trouble, there's a good reason for that. And so instead of our first instinct being, okay, how can I punish them, what kind of consequence can I give them, the question should be, why are they having such a hard time? Why can't they meet this expectation? And what do they need in order to have success in the situation? And so for some kids, it is that they're hyperactive. Like they can't sit. And I find that a lot in the work I do with toddlers, it's like, well, we should all be sitting here for 30 minutes. I'm like, well, you're not talking to them. You're just only talking to your partner. They're just sitting there in their high chair and they've already eaten in 2 minutes and they're bored. Yeah, they're not going to want to sit at the table. Or a toy shouldn't be allowed at the table, but they should sit here for 30 minutes. Okay, well, that's not really realistic. So a lot of the work I do with parents in those earlier years is, okay, well, what is actually realistic from a developmental perspective? I would say everything I do is kind of done through that lens. And then for our older kids, same thing. So why are they having a hard time? Maybe they just sat all day in school and they actually can't sit anymore by the time it's dinner. Maybe, dinners are tense and there's family conflict at the table and they're trying to avoid it and they want to get out of it. So that is my just overall approach to every single thing I do at Nurtured First in my private practice. But I think it really applies to these older kids as well.
Yeah. And that happened to us the other night. Well, maybe a couple months back. My son, who does tend to be more energetic
Mhm.
than at least for sure my daughter, if we're just going to look at the two of their personalities and temperaments and whatnot. And I think, like you said, the developmental expectation of, their attention spans and, how we're catering to that, I think is a huge, huge aspect here. But my son, he was getting up and kind of hopping around in between bites, and of course, for me, it didn't even phase me. I didn't even notice it, honestly. Like, it was just, we were all talking, and I think we were playing like a card game with those conversation starters, where we're all asking each other questions, and it just was very casual. And my husband kept, saying, sit down, sit down, sit down. And then almost saying like, well, if you don't sit down, and, the threat and the discipline was about to come. And my son, I didn't even have to say anything. My son, who again was 8 at the time, he turned to his dad and he said, Dad, I sat at school all day and gave all my energy to not get in trouble at school and to sit in my seat. This is where I'm safe. This is where I can run around and hopefully not get in trouble. And my husband's face was just like, his eyes went wide, and it just like this light bulb went off of, oh, got it. And since then, he's never commented on it again, and my son knows
Love it.
he's supposed to sit down. And when he's in a restaurant or, when he needs to, he will. But I just thought that was so beautiful that he was able to articulate that. And I think
That's
just,
so good.
again, some parents may not understand or know, and it's just for them to be open-minded to, well, there might be something else going on. They're not just doing this to be defiant or to, not listen to you or not follow the rules. There's something else underlying that is underneath, right?
Yeah, that's so good. And the fact that he felt comfortable to say that to your husband says everything, right, about their
Yeah.
relationship. And I find the same thing. Some my kids love to call me out because you can preach this all day long, but then you're human, and it's 6 o'clock, and you're all sitting down for dinner, and you're like, "Kids, just sit. Like,
Right.
let's just have a nice family dinner for a minute. Why is this too much to ask?" Right? And so my kids will call me out too when I'm like
Mhm.
that. And then a lot of it is thinking about, okay, well, what story's playing through my mind right now? And it's usually actually not about the kids. It's about like, I'm overstimulated. I had a busy day. I want to connect with you guys, or it brings something up in me when you get up all the time and you won't sit. So I think a lot of times it's our own stories that impact the way we're responding to our kids in those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so excited because I know this conversation could go for hours and hours and in many different directions. But I know I have a book coming out in May that talks more about a lot of these things that we're talking about. I know you have a book that you're working on right now and that you're writing that's going to be coming out probably sometime next year.
Mhm.
If you want to share anything more about that, and or where people can find you on, your podcast, your social media, etc. Because I know people are going to listen to this and want to hear more from you. So.
Yeah, first off, I'm so excited for your book. Like I said, I can't wait to read it. I think it's so needed. We need to talk about play more. I feel like I talk about it all the time and it's still not enough. So I can't wait to read it
Thank you.
and show it to my clients and have it sit in my office. That's going to be great. Yeah, everyone can find me on Instagram at Nurtured First. I'm there every day talking about different topics related to parenting, kids up to tween age years. And then my podcast is Robot Unicorn. I'm on there with my husband, Scott. He co hosts the podcast with me. He's an engineer. He's not a professional at all, but he has a lot of great questions, and we talk about all things parenting. So you can find us Robot Unicorn or Nurtured First.
I love it. Well, Jess, thank you so much for spending time with us
Of
today.
course.
You are just so wise in your words, and just you are helping so many parents at such a big level that I'm just a huge fan of you, and I just feel like so many parents need to hear what you have to say. So I hope everyone just runs out there and subscribes and follows, and eventually when your book comes out, I'd love to support you with that too, because I know that's going to be a huge game changer for parents. So thank you
Thank you
again
so
for being here.
much. Yeah, thank you. And the admiration is mutual. So thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.